The wind carried dust across the empty plains, whispering through the tall grass as the sun sank behind the faraway mountains. Miles from any town stood an old wooden ranch, lonely, silent, and forgotten by most travelers. Only one man lived there now, a man named Ethan Graves. He was a quiet rancher, the kind who spoke more to his horses than to people. Years of living alone had hardened him, yet there was something gentle in his eyes, a kindness that still survived under the weight of his solitude. One cold evening, as Ethan finished fixing a broken fence, he heard something unusual, a faint rustle near the barn. At first he thought it was the wind again, but then came the sound of footsteps, light and hesitant. He reached for his lantern and walked carefully toward the noise. The dim light revealed a figure trying to hide behind a haystack. "Who's there?" Ethan asked in his deep but calm voice. The figure froze. Then slowly a young woman stepped out from the shadows. She was covered in dust and wore a torn shawl around her shoulders. Her eyes, wide with fear, met his for a moment before she looked down. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to trespass." Ethan lowered his lantern. "You're not from around here," he said. "Where are you headed?" She hesitated. "Nowhere," she whispered. "I just needed a place to rest. Just for tonight." Ethan looked at her for a long time. He could see she was exhausted, her hands trembling from the cold. Without saying much more, he nodded toward the barn. "There's a small cot in there. You can stay till morning." Her eyes lifted slightly in surprise. "Thank you," she murmured. That night Ethan couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the stranger in his barn. Who was she? Why was she out here alone? He'd seen drifters before, but there was something different about this one. She seemed fragile, yet her voice carried a quiet strength. At sunrise, he found her sitting by the fence watching the horses graze. She looked calmer now, the morning light softening her tired face. "You can stay for breakfast," he offered. The woman smiled faintly for the first time. "I'd like that." Over a simple meal of bread and coffee, she told him her name, Clara Hale. She said she had come from a small town far east, running away from a life that felt like a cage. Her father had promised her to a man she didn't love, and she couldn't bear it anymore. She had left in the night, walking for days until she found herself lost in the wilderness. Ethan listened quietly. "You're lucky you made it this far," he said. "These lands aren't kind to travelers." "I know," she replied. "But I'd rather face the wild than live a life that isn't mine." Her words stayed with him long after breakfast. There was something brave about her, something honest. Ethan wasn't used to company, but he couldn't bring himself to ask her to leave. So Clara stayed, or at first for a day, then another. She helped around the ranch, feeding the horses, mending old clothes, sweeping the porch. Slowly, the empty ranch began to feel alive again. Evenings became their favorite time. They would sit by the fireplace, Ethan mending tools while Clara read old books she found in his trunk. Sometimes they didn't speak at all, yet the silence between them was peaceful, not lonely. One evening, as rain tapped softly on the roof, Clara looked at Ethan and said, "You live here all alone?" He nodded. "Been that way for years. Used to have my brother around, but he left after our parents passed. Never came back." "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Ethan shrugged. "The land's enough company most days, but I guess it gets quiet sometimes." She smiled gently. "Quiet isn't always bad. It gives space for the heart to breathe." For a moment their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. A small warmth neither had felt in years. Days turned into weeks. Clara's laughter began to echo through the house, and Ethan found himself waiting for it, cherishing it like sunlight. She learned to ride the horses, and he taught her how to fix fences and milk the cows. They teased each other, shared stories, and built a rhythm that felt almost like a forgotten dream of family. But one cold night, as the wind howled outside, Clara seemed restless. She stood by the window, staring at the dark horizon. Ethan noticed and asked softly, "Something bothering you?" She hesitated before turning to him. Her voice trembled slightly. "I'm just thinking how strange life is. I ran from people who wanted to keep me, only to find myself here where I want to stay." Ethan looked at her with quiet surprise. He didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. "You're safe here, Clara. You can stay as long as you like." She stepped closer, her eyes shining in the firelight. You've given me more kindness than anyone ever has, she said. You didn't ask who I was or what I'd done. You just helped, he smiled gently. Sometimes that's all a person needs. For a moment, neither spoke. The air felt different, heavy yet calm. Then Clara whispered something that caught Ethan completely off guard. You'll sleep with me now. Ethan blinked, unsure he'd heard right. She saw the confusion in his face and quickly added, I don't mean that way, her voice broke slightly. I can't sleep alone tonight. The wind sounds like the past and it scares me. Her words were innocent, trembling with sincerity. Ethan's heart softened. He nodded slowly. All right, he said gently. If it helps you rest, you can stay in my room. I'll take the chair. But Clara shook her head. No, you've done enough for me. Please just sit nearby. That's all I need. That night, the storm outside grew stronger, but inside the ranch, peace settled quietly. Clara rested on the bed, her breathing soft and even while Ethan sat nearby, the glow of the fire lighting his face. Every so often she stirred and whispered his name, and he'd reply softly, I'm here. And when morning came, the world outside was white with frost. Clara opened her eyes to find Ethan still sitting there, half asleep but smiling faintly. She looked at him, feeling something new in her heart, something safe, something pure. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running anymore. Outside, the sun rose over the silent plains, touching the ranch with gold. The old lonely house wasn't lonely anymore. Two souls had found a quiet beginning, one that neither had expected but both had needed deeply. Little did they know, the peace they found that night was only the start of a story that would test the strength of their hearts in ways they never imagined. The frost melted slowly under the morning sun, and the smell of fresh hay filled the air. Ethan opened the door and breathed deeply. The world outside looked peaceful, but something inside him had changed. Since Clara arrived, his silent ranch had begun to feel alive again. For the first time in years, he had someone to share his breakfast with, someone who smiled when he came back from the fields. Clara had also changed. The fear that once shadowed her eyes had begun to fade. Her laughter came more easily now, and she hummed softly while sweeping or feeding the horses. The loneliness she once carried had started to lift, replaced by quiet warmth. Every day seemed simple, yet meaningful. They worked side by side, shared small jokes, and built something that neither could name. Ethan was careful never to cross the line between kindness and closeness, but his heart knew he cared for her more than he wanted to admit. One afternoon, Clara stood by the fence watching the horses gallop across the open land. It feels strange, she said softly. All my life I thought freedom would be loud and full of excitement, but it's quiet here still. It feels right. Ethan smiled. Freedom doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just listens. She turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw gratitude mixed with something deeper. She wanted to speak, but didn't. Instead, she nodded and looked back at the horizon. As the days passed, they grew closer. Ethan taught Clara to use the lasso, and she teased him whenever she missed. At night, they shared stories. His of the land, hers of her childhood before everything turned cold. The nights felt longer, but not lonely anymore. One evening, Clara found an old guitar in the attic. It was dusty and missing a string, but she managed to tune it enough to play. Her voice filled the small house with a soft melody that wrapped around Ethan like a warm blanket. He sat by the fire, listening quietly, lost in her song. When she finished, he whispered, That was beautiful. She smiled. My mother taught me. I used to sing when I felt scared. Well, he said gently, keep singing. The house likes it. From then on, the evenings were filled with music and laughter. The walls that had once echoed only with wind now carried the sound of life. Ethan didn't say much, but his eyes followed Clara wherever she went. He noticed the way her hair caught the light, the way her hands moved gently with every chore, and how she looked at the world as if she was learning to live again. But happiness in the Wild West was always fragile, like glass on rough ground. One morning, while Ethan was checking the fences, he saw dust clouds in the distance. A rider was coming fast. He waited, uneasy. When the man stopped near the gate, Ethan recognized the uniform, a town deputy. Morning, the deputy said, nodding. You the owner of this place? Ethan nodded. I am. I'm looking for a woman. Name's Clara Hale. She's wanted back east, not for crime, but her father's been searching for her. Said she ran off before her arranged marriage. Ethan's stomach tightened. She's here, he admitted quietly. But she's safe. She doesn't want to go back. The deputy sighed. Her father sent a letter. He says he's not angry, just wants her home. But you know how these things go. If she doesn't return, he might send people less polite than me. Ethan looked at the ground for a long time. I'll talk to her, he said finally. That night, as the fire crackled, Ethan told Clara what had happened. Her hands froze around the cup she was holding. They found me, she whispered. He nodded. A deputy came. Says your father wants you back. Clara's eyes filled with quiet fear. I can't go, Ethan, you don't understand. My father means well, but he'll lock me in that house again. I'll lose everything, my freedom, my peace. This. She looked around the small room that had become her home. Ethan's heart ached. I know, he said softly. But running can't last forever. If you stay, they might come for you. And I don't want you hurt. Tears glimmered in her eyes. I finally feel alive here. Don't make me leave. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the woman who had walked out of the wilderness with nothing but courage. He knew she deserved to stay free. I won't let anyone take you, he said finally. For days after that, they lived with quiet worry. Every sound of hoofbeats made their hearts jump. But the deputy never returned. Slowly, life found rhythm again, though the fear still lingered like a distant shadow. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Clara stood by the porch, watching the golden light spread across the land. Ethan joined her. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, she said, I don't know what tomorrow brings, but if I have to leave one day, I want you to know. This place gave me my life back. You gave me peace. Ethan turned to her, his voice low. You gave me something too. I didn't know I was lonely until you came. Now I don't know how to be without you. Clara's eyes softened. She reached for his hand. Then don't be, she whispered. They stood there hand in hand as the stars began to appear one by one. Weeks passed, and no one came for Clara. Word must have faded, or perhaps her father had given up. Either way, peace returned fully to the ranch. The two worked together like they'd always belonged there. One spring morning, Clara planted a small garden near the porch. She worked with care, pressing seeds into the earth. When Ethan came over with a jug of water, she smiled up at him. If these grow, we'll have flowers by summer, he chuckled. Then this place will finally look like someone lives here. As months passed, the flowers did bloom, bright and full of life. And every evening, Clara would pick one and place it on the table, saying softly, for the house that saved me. One day, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Clara turned to Ethan. Do you ever think about the future? He nodded slowly. I used to think it was just more days like yesterday, but now, I think maybe it could be more than that, she smiled. Me too. And though neither said the word love, it hung in the air between them, clear, quiet, and real. Years later, people traveling through that lonely stretch of land would sometimes stop by Ethan Graves's ranch for water or rest. They would see a man and woman working side by side, their laughter carrying across the wind. They'd hear stories about how the rancher once lived alone until fate brought him a lost traveler. And those who stayed long enough would see, in their small, simple way, what love really looked like. Not in grand words or promises, but in gentle care, shared silence, and two souls who had finally found home in each other. The ranch remained far from towns and untouched by time. The world around them changed, but within those wooden walls, there was peace, built not by luck, but by two hearts that had chosen to stay. And every night, as the wind whispered through the fields, Clara still said softly before falling asleep, You'll sleep with me now, reminding them both of that cold night when loneliness ended and love quietly began.